Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I like to discuss a comment which I get about Brexit from time to time and have again this week. The claim that trade barriers with the EU are no big deal because only 8% of businesses export to the EU. Well, not only is this figure badly incorrect, but it misses a lot of important facts surrounding supply chains. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So I've been getting a few tragic pro-Brexit fallacies doing the rounds in the comments recently. Often happens when Brexit's looking particularly bad and the pro-leave crowd need another puff of copium. So I thought I might start doing the odd video as a sort of Brexit for Dummies look at some of the issues. So I've had someone else drag up the old Nigel Farage fallacy again. Oh, only 8% of businesses export to the EU. It doesn't matter, ignore them. Well, actually, since we left the single market and customs union, it's actually way less. We took a 33% hit in the number of businesses exporting to the EU from the UK after 2021 we left the single market. And you think, well, actually, Phil, that trivialises the extent of trade barriers even more, doesn't it? No. There are several aspects to this, but let's begin with what that reduction in exporters means. It means for the businesses which were exporting but were no longer doing so at the end of 2021, one of three things happened. First, the business had to shrink down or even go under altogether. Well, that means jobs were lost, profits were lower, which all adds up to lower tax revenues, contributing to the very high rate of tax that we now have in the UK. Second, the business may have moved their exporting operations to the EU. The government actively advised British-based businesses to do this. Well, that meant shipping jobs and profits to the EU, hiring people in the EU, paying taxes on those profits to an EU country instead of the UK. Well, that's not a benefit to us, is it? Third, might be like the Cheshire Cheese Company. They sold their business effectively in order to just keep going. Now, that didn't reduce the amount of exports as such, just the number of businesses. Two became one. Because the number of businesses is not the most meaningful measure. Some businesses are tiny. They've got like one person running them. Some are huge, employing tens of thousands. There's no real equivalence there. The fact of the matter is 42% of our exports are to the EU. Trade barriers matter. What matters to us is not how many businesses export to the EU, but how much of our trade is bound for the EU. It's a lot. But exports are not the whole story either. An export is just one end of a potentially very long supply chain. Like take car manufacturing, for example. The exporters are those who produce the finished cars in many cases. But there are businesses all over the UK which supply them with components, raw materials, services. If the factories close down and aren't replaced by another, then those suppliers will lose business, maybe even have to close down themselves. Now, those businesses may not export to the EU, but they are part of the supply chain and their business model is sensitive to trade friction, even if they're not at the sharp end of it. Because if the people they're supplying don't need their services anymore, then they go out of business. Then there's imports. Import controls are way weaker than export controls because our Tory Brexit government wouldn't dare apply reciprocal controls on EU imports in the same way that they apply them to British imports. But there are still some import controls. That is still trade friction. The trade barriers raised still work both ways. There are a lot of businesses in the UK which import from the EU. We don't have a lot of natural resources in Britain anymore, and we're very dependent upon imports of food and medicines. The more trade friction there is between Britain and the EU, the more difficult it is to get these imports. That means we pay higher prices for them. In fact, there's a double hit because the pound is worth much less against the euro compared with before the referendum, so we pay extra as a result of the exchange rate as well. That means either we, the customer, have to pay more for goods and services, or the business has to take the hit, becoming less competitive, meaning lower profits, lower tax revenues for the government. There's no trivialising the extent of trade barriers. If the impacts were minor, we would not have every business group in the country calling for the government to prioritise better trade relations with the EU. When the news was announced, that we were joining the CPTPP? The response from business groups was, whatever, now how are those better trading relations with the EU going? The number of businesses in Britain which relies on low trade friction with the EU is way higher than just those who export. It's those who supply those who export. It's those who service those who export. It's those who import. It's even those who aren't part of the chain at all. Imagine a town with lots of businesses or one large business that are part of European supply chains, and the trade friction becomes such that lots of jobs are lost in that town, something that continues to happen on a regular basis. Well, that town now has lost a load of pay packets, which means those families have to cut back. That means cutting back on spending on businesses which genuinely have nothing to do with the EU in any part of any supply chain. But they will still suffer because they will lose customers to job losses or real terms pay cuts caused by those who are dependent on trade with the EU. Brexit still makes life hard even for those businesses which do not directly rely on EU trade relations. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.